Thank you for tuning in to Trafficking Free America, a podcast channel produced by the U.S. Institute Against Human Trafficking and Kids Not for Sale. The goal of this podcast is to help inform about human trafficking in the U.S. It's to help educate on how to help engage in the fight to end human trafficking and inspire you to take action in your sphere of influence with the tools and guidance we are able to bring to you through content like this and trainings. In these next two episodes, we will be discussing victim restoration with Bekah Charleston. We've had her on the podcast before in episode 6 of season 2. Bekah is a former survivor who is an expert and speaker on the topic, helping victims in their attempt to leave the life. In these next two episodes, we'll dive into these issues that often surround a victim or survivor who has left the life. Most of the time, they depend on their pimp, and the only way they can make a living is through commercial sex. So how can we as a society do better in helping show them a better life and help them truly accomplish that better life? Bekah provides some insight for us to think about and consider as we strive to minister to these individuals. It's often the spot that we leave survivors to figure this out, which is why so many end up returning to the previous life. I pray you receive insight from this conversation over the next two episodes. Here's my conversation with Bekah. Hey, Bekah, thanks for joining our podcast today and helping with create a training on how we can truly address how to help survivors once they have kind of gone through a little bit of their first phase of rehabilitation. A lot of times what we're seeing is that victims go into survivor mode, basically going through a safe home or a program, leaving the life, if you would. And then there's a rehabilitation, where they get back into society, basically. And there seems to be a disconnect on how that happens. A lot of times we think, put them in the safe home, and then it's all glory from there, right? Mm-hmm. And that's really not the story. So thank you for joining us so that everyone kind of understands your background, where you come from. Go ahead, tell us a little bit about your story and your background when it comes to something like this.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Jeremy. And you're so right. So often that is really kind of the beginning. It's not the ending, right? Going in and getting services and having a safe place to stay is kind of sometimes where you just begin unraveling, But my background and the reason I'm here today, I actually survived more than a decade of sex trafficking that began as a minor at the age of 17 in Texas. And I wasn't able to get away until the federal authorities became involved. Ultimately, I wound up serving 13 months in federal prison because I was too scared to tell on my pimp. When someone beats you bloody, when they tell you that they'll kill you if you ever leave them or if you ever snitch on them, that's a scary threat. And it's a very viable threat too, when they've already been extremely violent with you. And so, it took a long road of recovery. I wound up running in 2009 is when I finally ran away, had the courage when my pimp was serving time in prison. I had the courage to run away from him and wish life got better then, but it didn't. I really kind of reverted back to some really negative behaviors and coping skills because I really had blamed myself for everything I had gone through. I thought that I made bad choices and that I got what I deserved. And so I really kind of floundered for a while. Ultimately, I was able to get my life back together. Thankfully, it was having compassion for someone else because I didn't have compassion for myself. But when I wound up in a different relationship a couple years after running away from trafficking and got pregnant in that relationship, that was kind of a big catalyst for me to want to change my life, to even have enough hope that things could be different, because I knew it had to be different for my kid, and so I was willing to make that sacrifice, which is what so often, running away from exploitation or trafficking, you're making enormous sacrifices for things that, you have worked extremely hard for. And that, as a victim, if you get to walk away, most often you just walk away with nothing but the clothes on your back. You don't even get to take your clothes. You don't get to take any of the belongings that you had. And so I started my life over from not even from scratch, from way less than scratch, because my trafficker had put $1 million of debt in my name. And obviously I had all these negative experiences for a decade and been arrested a bunch of times. And so It was a rocky road, as I mentioned, but thankfully I came back here to Texas and really had a community of support wrap around me once I did finally decide to change my life. And that began in the faith community for me. And so I received a lot of services, went to years of therapy, and wound up going back to school. I got my bachelor's degree and master's degree in criminal justice and criminology. And since that time, started my business in 2013. And now I'm in front of usually 5 to 10,000 people a year, training law enforcement and social workers across the country, as well as medical professionals and any other lay people on, what trafficking actually looks like in America, as well as the best way to intervene and help rehabilitate the individuals that survive. So I've done a lot of other things in that time as well, but at least that gives you a little bit of idea about who I am.
Absolutely. And if you're interested in Bekah's story, by all means, we have another podcast where we she talked about it and shared her perspective on a lot of stuff. I very much encourage you to go look at that. But and today, what we're going to talk about is truly like, I want to kind of start out with this. Bekah, you kind of started the discussion about this, but how hard is it truly to leave the life? Like, I don't think we have an understanding of that.
Yeah. I mean, even to that moment of getting away is just like domestic violence is often the scariest and most dangerous moment, is that when you are making that plan or you're trying to carry out that plan, that's when people most often that have been murdered by intimate partner violence, that's the most dangerous time. And so it's really no different with trafficking. Honestly, at one point we thought he had cameras in our cars. It was like he could read our minds, is what it felt like. And so even just thinking about a plan to leave him was terrifying, because, my number one thought every day is, how do I make him happy today? What do I do to have one of those sweet honeymoon days where he's actually nice to me and sweet to me versus, beating me up and cussing me out and calling me out my name. And so to even have the courage to think about leaving, and I think, once you're trapped in that kind of lifestyle, the amount of shame and stigma surrounding what you're doing is also a huge barrier. When I was years later, when I was getting my undergrad degree, I was working as an intern in Rise Court in Tarrant County for Judge Brent Carr, and I was doing my internship. And so one day I was in the office with the probation kind of case manager, the probation officer, and one of the parolees called in, and she was hysterically crying on the phone. And, so the case manager obviously got her to calm down and, okay, what's going on? Why are you so upset? And she said, well, I was trying to find a place to do community service at, but Goodwill told me I couldn't do it there because I was a former prostitute. Like, let that sink in for a moment. She wasn't looking for a job. She was looking to do community service and was denied because she had formerly been charged as a prostitute. Like, that is the kind of treatment for community service. I mean, like, goodness, like, it could have been, I'm not calling out Goodwill specifically because that could have been anyone. That's just oftentimes people's reaction to us. And so yet, people look at us from the outside and they think, well, if you really wanted to leave or change your life, you could. He's not with you all the time. People don't understand, like, once you start, especially when you start getting a criminal record, that becomes a huge barrier in itself. I mean, the financial abuse, financial control is a huge barrier. And so, but that moment when you're finally free is what I know to be true, is physical freedom does not equal emotional or mental freedom. And so for me, it was the first time in my life that I didn't have a man telling me what I was going to do, who I was, or all those things. And honestly, I was terrified, once I finally really changed my life. And it wasn't exciting at all. It was terrifying because now I'm navigating, in some ways it's easier to stay because at least you know what to deal with. Yeah, you might get raped. Yeah, you might get robbed, right? Like, there's going to be terrible consequences in that lifestyle, but you know how to navigate it when you're a survivor, right? When you're an individual with lived experience. And sometimes it's so much easier to just stay than it is to navigate a brand new world that you don't have a blueprint for, and you don't have anyone helping you. It could be really overwhelming and terrifying. And so thankfully, I had a supportive group of people around me, because I think healing takes place in community. You can't really do it on your own. And yeah.
Golly. I mean, yeah, the perspective of like man up, the perspective of like, every is the land of opportunity. Anyone should. It's slavery in a sense,
Yeah.
um, like, when I think about how the connection goes with slavery, it's almost like when, when everything was emancipated, right? It's like, oh, they could have just left. Why didn't they? Come on,
And
like
that's why we
look at
had
all the
Juneteenth. We have a
context of
whole
it. Yeah,
nother, yeah, right.
yeah, like just
Yeah.
become homeless. What's wrong with you? So naturally, it's hard enough to leave already, which also kind of is when we talked about this, with Brandy when talking about our safe homes, how hard it is to just stay. I mean, you're breaking a lot of chains in that situation, and like you just said, it's not just physical; it's also mental. And so once someone does finally go through the safe home process, um, you know, what is usually the next thing that they are currently introduced to? Not necessarily the right thing, but what are they usually becoming introduced to once they are about, let's say graduating from the safe home, if you would?
Yeah. So oftentimes, we have a lot of different products. I'll say we have a lot of different services. Maybe that's a better way to put it out
Mm-hmm.
there as far as living, in that transitional period of getting out of trafficking. We see that drop-in centers are great for that kind of intermediate. Sometimes there's inpatient that's needed for those individuals, and then the lucky ones that are able to find a bed, typically have about a year to 18 months at a restoration program, and that's going to look like giving away your cell phone. It's going to look like kind of almost going into hiding and for a period of time, and giving up a lot of freedoms that you enjoy, like cigarettes or cell phones. Like that could be a big deal breaker, that a lot of people don't want to go into restoration homes over cigarettes or cell phones, and that's their choice. So then there's also on the back end, we have like transitional living places that have less rules than a safe home, because the security risk isn't quite as high, because it's individuals that have already gone through quite a bit of
Mm-hmm.
healing. And so they
Mm-hmm.
have a lot more freedom in transitional homes, where maybe they can live there for free and then actually have a job and go out to a job and then be able to come back. So it helps them for a longer period of time. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, because a year to 18 months, when you get kind of sucked out of society, and you get the blessing of being able to like rest in a safe place, being able to heal. And like I said earlier, that's kind of when you think about being in the life, you in some ways get kind of addicted to the chaos. I feel like I operate really well in chaotic situations that other people might be flipping out. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually, and I think it's almost like an adrenaline junkie, like law enforcement. I mean, there's firefighters, like there's other fields that you're constantly around trauma. Like as far as in the game, in the life, while I was being exploited, I was constantly, fighting with tricks. I'm running in and out of hotel rooms, evading hotel security, trying to evade law enforcement. I'm getting fights. I'm facing violence at the hands of my trafficker, like all of these things, right? And so when you get plucked out of that and placed in this quiet, safe environment with people that are kind to you, most people kind of bug out a little bit initially,
Mm-hmm.
because you know and I think that like we can't unwind when we're still in that place of chaos, right? Because we're still surviving, we're still going. And once we finally have that calmness and safety, that's when the hard work really starts. And so typically 12 to 18 months, I don't think, you know everyone's level of traumatic or trauma is different, and everyone's healing is also different. It's so individualized, but I think there's still a huge need for supportive care after people are released from safe houses, just because you're kind of thrust right back out into society. And yeah, sure, it was easy to heal and make changes while you were in this soft, supportive, safe place, but now once you're kind of back out on your own, sometimes a big shift like that could throw you right back to where you were before. just because you didn't have that practice of getting your feet under you, and
Right.
a lot of times the way that leave safe houses, some of them are really great at making sure obviously you have your next place to live. Maybe they'll even give you some furniture or something like that, or some household items to get you set up. But that's not always the case either, like, because a lot of women don't go through the full program. And so they don't wind up getting, a lot of the individuals, I should say, not just women, but they don't wind up getting the full benefit because for whatever reason, maybe they just weren't ready to complete the program at that time or
Right.
something. So I think it there's some promising practices coming out, as far as there's some organizations that are offering like subsidized living, which I think is really exciting to see, because then we can get that individual set up on their own. They're already,
Mhm.
they help them all the different barriers that are going to come up inevitably about getting out on their own, help them with those barriers, but then also have like a almost a sliding scale of, help that is higher in the beginning, and then over, 2 to 3 years becomes less and less. They become more self, sufficient and independent. So I think that's really exciting to see, because, the safe house idea, most promising practice right now is to do about 6 to 8 beds max per
Mhm.
home. They kind of found that works best. I know there's been some people that try to do big, huge 100-bed homes, and I've
Yeah.
never seen that work out well
Sure.
or even work out at all. So
Right.
there's definitely a need to find a new innovative way to help people that maybe doesn't cost quite as much, because you're building all these 6 to 8 bed homes.
Right. I mean, it's not a profitable industry when it
Right.
comes to rehabilitation and stuff like that. And that's the truth around it. That if you're getting into this of like, oh, let me do a really systematic way of not breaking the bank to help. No, you need to go into it ready to break the bank to help even just one individual, to be honest.
Yeah.
And that needs to be. But the thought process around that is, if we get more community members to truly help in the best way possible, right? Um, I mean, that's how churches, the select people, some trusted people around a safe home to keep that home extremely safe. And then the community helps that group of people to help that safe home. Boom, there you go. Like, it doesn't have to be an individual directly go to the safe home. It could just be a group of, with a few filters before they actually truly know or understand or see where that safe home is. But but again, after safe home though, you talked about a lot of like great services that are around, that exist for kind of halfway homes in a sense. Not That's not the right word, but it's very similar to one. But what is like what are those services around the country, and do we have enough?
Definitely not enough at all. Um, yeah, and I think what something that you just said, I wanted to highlight. You know, when people hear about this issue and they decide to get in and do something, a lot of people think they have to start a nonprofit. But like you said,
Hmm.
like, research what's in your area, find out who's doing what work, and see how you can partner with them and help serve their people better.
Hmm.
Potentially, it's not, you don't always have to recreate the wheel.
Right.
um, but as far as the services, yeah, so we don't have enough, at all. There is a great organization called the National Trafficking Sheltered Alliance, NTSA, and they kind of have become somewhat of a hub to find out what restoration beds have, what restoration homes have beds available across the country.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so for a case manager, if I'm dealing with one individual that comes in and trying to find them housing, I might have to call 20 to 30 houses, safe homes across the country.
Right.
Whereas
Right.
with NTSA, you can just go to that one place, and then they'll look across the country. And so because they have partnerships built with all those different organizations, and so I think that's something new and innovative that's saved a lot of time, obviously, and helped put people in beds and places that were safe for them. But then there's supportive, like, there's more community based services that, maybe you don't, maybe you have housing, you have stable housing, but you just need either case management or help paying for therapy, or just like a weekly support group that meets. Like, there's a lot of services out there like that. I say a lot. There are services out there like that. And then, what I think, honestly, we have the biggest crisis of, in my personal opinion, Jeremy, would the that before the restoration home care. So many people, like, the restoration homes are kind of more set up to take someone that's not in crisis, right? They're
Right.
not a stabilizing home. They're a restoration home. And so what we see on that front end is a lot of individuals that, maybe are looking for housing and a way to get out, but they're still using drugs, for instance.
So that
Well,
so they're to help me understand, they're trying to leave, but they cannot go to a restoration home. That's the situation to go to a safe home, right?
right. Yeah. So it can take a little while to get into a safe home after the life, and it's understandable because,
Oh, so safe home would be before restoration or after restoration? Help us understand.
yeah, yeah, I think everybody's journey through it is different, and for
Sure.
some of these reasons that we're kind of addressing is,
Mhm.
they're still on drugs, and so they need a different venue where they're most likely only, two or three other people, if any other people. It might be individualized living where they're able to kind of land, begin receiving some of those services, and then, kind of stabilize, and then they can maybe go on to a safe home. And so, because safe homes don't take people in crisis, and that's because they have to worry about their 7 or 8 other individuals. And so, if you bring one person in crisis that's potentially still using or something like that, it could disrupt everyone else's healing journey at the safe house. And
Mm.
so, I think that immediate crisis housing is probably what we have the least of. There's only one
Interesting.
organization that I know of in the whole country that has zero barrier housing. And that's what we call it. We talk about it in the terms of barriers, like what would prevent you from taking people into your home. And so this place called Lyft, it's Lyft in Massachusetts. And I think it's an acronym that stands for something, but living in freedom together, that's what it is.
Mhm.
And so maybe it is Lift, sorry. But they will take individuals right off the street that are potentially still on something, and they will allow them to detox in that facility. But they're
Mm.
set up and built for that, right? That was their mission from the beginning. But
Mhm.
that's like one safe home, or one
Right.
crisis stabilization housing home
Mhm.
that I know of across the country. Yeah. So I think that to me is a big rub, as well as that kind of long term component of how do we make sure that we are really setting you up for success for life, because sometimes leaving that safe home kind of puts you right back in that vacuum of you're lonely again. And sometimes that loneliness is what drives us to go back to unhealthy relationships, because it still fills that void, even though it might be unhealthy and it might hurt, but we're designed for connection. And so how do we see better success rates? And I think that would be, being able to walk alongside people for longer. Would it help?
That's part one of this podcast. We'll be launching the next one soon, so make sure you are subscribed. If you want to be more involved in the fight to end human trafficking, please join our abolitionists. Just go to usiaht.org/abolitionist to subscribe for free and receive tons of training and resources to begin the journey of making America a trafficking-free zone.